Chapter 21. I had for some time observed in my host's highly informed and powerfully proportioned daughter that kindly and protective sentiment which, whether above the earth or below it, an all-wise Providence has bestowed upon the feminine division of the human race. But until very lately I described it to that affection for pets which a human female at every age shares with a human child. I now became painfully aware that the feeling with which Z deigned to regard me was different from that which I had inspired in Tari, but this conviction gave me none of that complacent gratification which the vanity of man ordinarily conceives from a flattering appreciation of his personal merits on the part of the fair sex. On the contrary, it inspired me with fear. Yet of all the GE in the community, if Z were perhaps the wisest and the strongest, she was, by common repute, the gentlest, and she was certainly the most popularly beloved. The desire to aid, to succor, to protect, to comfort, to bless, seemed to pervade her whole being. Though the complicated miseries that originate in penury and guilt are unknown to the social system of the Vril Ya, still no sage had yet discovered in Vril an agency which could banish sorrow from life, and whenever amongst her people sorrow found its way, there Z followed in the mission of comforter. Did some sister Gi fail to secure the love she sighed for, Z sought her out and brought all the resources of her lore and all the consolations of her sympathy to bear upon a grief that so needs the solace of a confidant. In the rare cases where grave illness seized upon childhood or youth, and the cases less rare when in the hardy and adventurous probation of infants some accident attended with pain and injury occurred, Z forsook her studies and her sports and became the healer and nurse. Her favorite flights were towards the extreme boundaries of the domain where children were stationed on guard against outbreaks of warring forces in nature or the invasions of devouring animals, so that she might warn them of any peril which her knowledge detected or foresaw, or be at hand if any harm had befallen. Nay, even in the exercise of her scientific acquirements, there was a concurrent benevolence of purpose and will. Did she learn any novelty in invention that would be useful to the practitioner of some special art or craft, she hastened to communicate and explain it. Was some veteran sage of the college perplexed and wearied with the toil of an abstruse study, she would patiently devote herself to his aid, work out details for him, sustain his spirits with her hopeful smile, quicken his wit with her luminous suggestion, be to him, as it were, his own good genius made visible as the strengthener and inspirer. The same tenderness she exhibited to the inferior creatures. I have often known her to bring home sick and wounded animal, and tend and cherish it as a mother would tend and cherish her stricken child. Many a time when I sat in the balcony or hanging garden on which my window opened, I watched her rising in the air on her radiant wings, and in a few moments groups of infants below, catching sight of her, would soar upward with joyous sounds of greeting, clustering and sporting around her, so that she seemed a very center of innocent delight. When I have walked with her amidst the rocks and valleys without the city, the elk deer would scent or see her from afar, come bounding up, eager for the caress of her hand, or follow her footsteps till dismissed by some musical whisper that the creature had learned to comprehend. It is the fashion among the virgin GE to wear on their foreheads a circlet or coronet with gems resembling opals, arranged in 4 points or rays like stars. These are lustreless in ordinary use, but if touched by the vril wand, they take a clear lambent flame, which illuminates, yet not burns. This serves as an ornament in their festivities, and as a lamp, if, in their wanderings beyond their artificial lights, they have to traverse the dark. There are times when I have seen Z's thoughtful majesty of face lighted up by this crowning halo, that I could scarcely believe her to be a creature of mortal birth, and bent my head before her as the vision of a being among the celestial orders. But never once did my heart feel for this lofty type of the noblest womanhood a sentiment of human love. Is it that, among the race I belong to, man's pride so far influences his passions that woman loses to him her special charm of woman if he feels her to be in all things eminently superior to himself? But by what strange infatuation could this peerless daughter of a race which, in the supremacy of its powers and the felicity of its conditions, ranked all other races in the category of barbarians, have deigned to honor me with her preference? In personal qualifications, though I passed for good-looking amongst the people I come from, the handsomest of my countrymen might have seemed insignificant and homely beside the grand and serene type of beauty which characterized the aspect of the Vril-Ya. That novelty, the very difference between myself and those to whom Z was accustomed, might serve to bias her fancy, was probable enough, and as the reader will see later, such a cause might suffice to account for the predilection with which I was distinguished by a young Guy scarcely out of her childhood, and very inferior in all respects to Z. But whoever will consider those tender characteristics which I have just described to the daughter of Aflin may readily conceive that the main cause of my attraction to her was in her instinctive desire to cherish, to comfort, to protect, and, in protecting, to sustain and to exalt. Thus, when I look back, I account for the only weakness unworthy of her lofty nature, which bowed the daughter of the Vril-Ya to a woman's affection for one so inferior to herself as was her father's guest. But be the cause what it may, the consciousness that I had inspired such affection thrilled me with awe, a moral awe of her very imperfections, of her mysterious powers, of the inseparable distinctions between her race and my own, and with that awe, I must confess to my shame, there combined the more material and ignoble dread of the perils to which her preference would expose me. Under these anxious circumstances, fortunately, my conscience and sense of honor were free from reproach. It became clearly my duty, if Z's preference continued to manifest, to intimate it to my host, with, of course, all the delicacy which is ever to be preserved by a well-bred man in confiding to another any degree of favor by which one of the fair sex may condescend to distinguish him. Thus, at all events, I should be freed from responsibility or suspicion of voluntary participation in the sentiments of Z, and the superior wisdom of my host might probably suggest some sage extrication from my perilous dilemma. In this resolve, I obeyed the ordinary instinct of civilized and moral man, who, erring though he be, still generally prefers the right course in those cases where it is obviously against his inclinations, his interests, and his safety to elect the wrong one.